Good evening and welcome to the Ward One Neighborhood Advisory Board meeting for Monday, June 12th, 2023. Can I get a roll call, please?
Ginsburg. Terry. Here. Tiskovich.
Here.
Ross. Absent this time. Shrimp.
Here.
Tyson.
Here.
Wager.
Here.
Warninghouse.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. We're going to move on to public comment. This item is for the public comment on any action item or for any general public comment that is limited to no more than 3 minutes for each. Do we have any public comment?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have Pablo Nava Duran registered for public comment. Pablo, you'll have 3 minutes. It's over here, but I can hear you from wherever you stand.
Thanks.
Please state your name for the record before you start.
All right, so hello, my name is Pablo Duran. I live in Ward 3, so this is my first meeting, Ward 1 meeting, because we're here to catch up with district that could change your ward. Since it probably is your last day of Ward 1 meeting, because we have a new virtual map if you check your ward, if you're still at Ward 1 or no longer Ward 1. It's a bias. So, and then also we have Janet Biggis who are terminating after 2024 season, she cannot run for the election, that if she allowed to serve on a councilwoman for after done with district, if he doesn't live in new Ward 1. So I got some options for Ward 1. So Ward 1, you bring in from Ward 3 to Ward 1. You see over here, and then option 2 is from New World to over here, and the option 3 is similar like this. Keep it from South of Palm Lane. Here's option 4 over here, and then option 5. Over here, keep us west of South Virginia Street, except the Sky Mountain and then Collin Ranch. And then option 6, you bring the whole community from Ward 3 all the way to the airport. And if you have any more question concern Ward 1, please let me know. I'll try to get to fix it, make sure that does align for democracy, and thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you, Pablo. Up next, we have KD Jones. Sure. Go
Good
ahead.
evening, everybody.
3 minutes.
I'll start with good news. I came in a few weeks back into a Ward 1 meeting, and I walked in after having walked the river and noticing the bridge, Keystone Bridge, in the state that it's in. Happy to see that some work has been done, but it still has, looks like some major structural deficiencies. It's been rebar, missing concrete. And so, but I did go by and we were working on top of it, like crews work. So that was good. What I want next?
Refuse, recycling, river, Keystone Overpass.
Yeah, what happened to the Big Belly? Garbage cans, the solar power, they've been replaced by just standard garbage cans, and they were overflowing with garbage after the river fest. I mean, overflowing to the point where some of that, getting into the river, a lot of it, there's overflowing, mostly with recyclable materials. I don't understand what that issue is, or why we got rid of Big Belly solar recycling, because they were able to contain a lot of the refuse. And I thought in a much more environmentally friendly way. So that would be something to look at. And the Lear, I didn't park in there, but the Lear Theater. I don't know, this is my first meeting, so I don't know kind of where we're at, what's going on, but I live at Truckee Ridge Apartments Way, which have its own concerns right now. But the Lear Theater, we'd like to see it, open and used for art and music. That's all I have to say.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Chair, I have no further public comment registered at this time. Would anyone else in the room like to give public comment today? There'll be another opportunity for public comment at the end of the meeting. Would anyone on Zoom like to give public comment today? If you'd like to give public comment on Zoom, please use the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom window to let me know. I'll give you just a minute. We don't have any participants on Zoom who'd like to give public comment, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. We move on to item A3, approval of the agenda for the next meeting, June 12, 2023. Has everybody had a chance to review? Any changes or corrections?
No changes, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. First and a second. All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. Move on to item A4, approval of the minutes from our meeting from April 10th, 2023. Has everybody had a chance to review? Changes or corrections? Need a motion in a second. Okay. First, we would like the second.
Second.
All right, thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. We move on to item A5, council liaison.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Breckus is not present, so we will move on to the council liaison report if that's okay.
So item A6, staff liaison report.
Hello, everyone. Tyler Shaw, again, community liaison for the record. It's wonderful to see all of you here today. I actually have a few updates for all of you. I will start with reappointments. I mentioned in the last meeting that some of our NAB members' term limits are expiring, and I'm sad to say that our chair, Mike Ginsberg, and member Tyson have turned out. So the July meeting will be their last meeting before a mandatory one-year cool down period, at which point they could reapply to the Ward 1 NAB if they so chose. I reached out to all the other NAB members whose terms were set to expire, but were eligible for reappointment. If they have not submitted their applications, those applications will go to the July 19th council meeting for potential reappointment. That decision will be up to Councilmember Breckus. Next, I don't know if any of you saw, but I have some flyers from the RTC up at the front for NAB members and also for the public regarding the Arlington Bridge remodel. They're having a public meeting, but all the information is on the flyer if you are interested. Next, we are having a Ward 1 community cleanup on June 24th at 9 a.m. at Echo Loader Elementary School. This community cleanup is free to all residents, and at the cleanup, they will be taking normal trash, e-waste like flat screen TVs, lawnmowers, appliances. They will also be taking hazardous waste, things like paint, gasoline, oil. Yeah, Jerry.
What's the address of the school?
Let me see if I can find the address real quick.
And maybe you can just tell me.
Yeah. I also wanted to let you all know that the Parks Department has sent out the Barbara Bennett Park survey. I sent that information out to all of you separately, the NAB members, and I will also make sure to include it in the packet for tonight's meeting, which will be available to the public so that everyone can have it. The survey is aimed at gathering feedback regarding future potential enhancements at Barbara Bennett Park. So they just want a wide selection of the community. So anyone you can send it to, anyone who's interested, even people who aren't interested, just send it. We want as much feedback as we can get. So that's all I have on Barbara Bennett. Let's see, our next meeting of the Ward 1 NAB will be on July 10th. And those are my updates, Mr. Chairman.
I have a
Yes, ma'am.
question. On the Arlington Bridge, I looked at that. Were we supposed to comment on the design? Because I think it's about the ugliest thing I've ever seen.
I think the contact information for the public information officers on the flyer. If it's not, I can give it to you, but RTC gave me those flyers and asked me to distribute them.
Right, but is it done? Is that a done deal? That's the design?
Unfortunately, I don't know. You'll have to reach out to RTC.
I read the same thing, and my reading of it is design said like 60% done. They've already
That's kind of
done.
how.
They've already done the community features. All that stuff has happened in the past.
There should be the people that know how to design, because I know that for a fact.
My question actually has to do with, you had an opportunity to talk to the city attorney's office about the term limits
expenses associated with that.
Yes, I did. I checked with the city attorney office, the city attorney's office, and they confirmed my interpretation, which was that member Ginsburg and member Tyson are not eligible for reappointment to the NAB until their 1 year sit out period, at which point they will become eligible again.
Okay,
The only thing that was in question was COVID.
yeah, it was, we didn't do anything for
Mhm.
a year or whatever. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, any other questions from the NAB members?
All right, thank you. We're gonna move on to business items for approving Ryan Law tonight. Presentation and discussion by City of Reno staff on the Title 18 zoning code cleanup. Discussion item only.
Yeah, it was provided, not your technology. My name is Angela Booth, I work with the city of Reno in the Development Services Department. We are reaching out to each of the NABs and kind of giving you an update on some of the big projects we're working on. Right now, we are working on what we call the zoning code cleanup. So I have a quick presentation, just to give you a little bit of history as to what we've been doing for the past couple of years and kind of where we're going. So I'm not sure if any of you recall, it was prior to COVID, back in 2019, 2020, and 2021, we as a city hired a consultant, Clarion, to help us to really rewrite a new zoning code. And so that code was adopted. You want to go ahead and click the next one. That code was adopted back in 2021. There are some big key things that went into that process. It's been a 3-year stakeholder public outreach process. So there was a lot of public meetings, a lot of feedback around the development community in terms of what's working and what's not. Some of the key things that we were looking at is our code was about 1,000 pages, right? So this is everything to do with zoning, meaning landscape requirements, parking requirements, uses, how we meld industrial next to residential, all those things. So we really took a hard look and said, what's working, what's not. We tied it back to our master plan. What did the master plan say we should be doing in terms of big picture? How do we want to grow as a city? So a lot of work went into it. There's a technical advisory committee made up of a lot of just experts, people that use the zoning code, people that were just interested along the way. So a lot of involvement in that. So 3 years later, we adopted a new code. And again, some of the big things that came out of that is we took a document that was about 1,000 pages and we took it down to about 750 pages. So we really condensed it and said, what doesn't need to be in there? We added a lot of graphics. And so for those of us that like do well with reading 1,000 pages, there's a lot. But for those of us that like to have images to go with, what does that mean? This new code really helps clarify what we're talking about. A lot of it too was just making things make better sense. You know, we had a whole probably 50 pages of different types of uses and where they're allowed. So just a lot to get through. So we really tried to streamline the whole document. Go ahead. And at the end of the day, we adopted a new code. Now, anytime you adopt a major document like that, you know there's going to be errors. And so we said, no, we'll come back in 6 months and we'll make some of those edits. So here we are 2 years later, and we're still working on those. Initially, we were like, oh, there's probably 20 to 30 things we need to do that. Then it became 100 things, 200 things, 300 things. Now we're up to over 400 things that we have found that were just errors. And some of them are simple, you know, grammatical or typos, and some of them are just what I would call major conflicts, where maybe one page says, here's your setbacks. Another page says, oh, no, here's your setbacks. But then another page says, no, here's your setbacks. So we've been as staff just keeping a list of all those things that we have found that just don't work and are conflicting. So we're cleaning those up now. So we're calling those as part of our zoning code cleanup. So we have 2 things going on here. One of them is the zoning code cleanup. So that's what staff is working on. We're leading that right now. The second is city council priorities. Now, when we adopted that new code, there were some things we said, these are really big topics. We're going to kind of set those aside and get to those later. So those are what we'll find as city council priorities. There's probably over 15 big picture things that we kind of put on the back burner. And we said, let's tackle those independently of the zoning code. A lot of those require a separate specialized consultant where we said maybe staff doesn't have the expertise or the time to do this. So let's hire somebody that really specializes in those things. So we have kind of 2 separate things happening. So what we're talking about right now is the zoning code cleanup, those 400 or so items. High level, let's go ahead and just click on the next one. Again, some of the big things is like we talked about, and some of them are super simple, some of them are bigger, broader, like, oh, that was a mistake. We really need to relook at that section of code and read that so it makes more sense. Go ahead. So as an example, we just threw some fun ones in here, we call them hidden Easter eggs. So of the 750-page document, there's some sections that you're like, well, that's a weird thing to put in there. Why would we put that in there? So as an example, we have some regulations. If you have a park, great, right, simple enough. One of those regulations is if you have a parking area, lighting. If you have lights that are taller than 3 feet, you have to go through a public process. Now, have you ever seen a parking lot with lights 3 feet? Like every parking lot has lights taller than 3 feet. So why did we put that in there? I don't know. But that probably needs to be cleaned up and say, well, yes, lights should be taller than 3 feet. And no, we shouldn't require a public review process because lights are taller than 3 feet. Like, let's just fix that, right? Another great example is if you're in a multi-family zoning district, great. And you require a conditional use permit, which is a public hearing, great. You have additional side setback. Well, what happens if you don't require a public hearing? Do you still have those wide setbacks? No, you don't. You have regular setbacks. So again, none of that really made sense to us. It should be, what are the setbacks, period? So we're going to clean a lot of those hidden Easter egg items up. And there's probably 50 other areas that we could call out as like, why did we do that? I don't know. You only find it when you accidentally find it, which is another problem. It's hard to administer a code when there's so many like weird little hidden things that you wouldn't know unless you found it. Go ahead. Some of the other big issues we have found is anything related to residential compatibility. This is a big deal, especially when it comes to infill. So for Ward 1, you guys are seeing a lot more of these infill projects where maybe, you have single family next to maybe a 20-unit apartment complex. Now, does it make sense to have a 3-story apartment complex next to a 1-story house? Maybe, but how do we make sure that those two uses fit better, right? We don't want you 5 feet apart. So what we'd like to do is take a higher level look and say, how do we make sure that we're doing infill in a way that really protects neighborhoods and protects the community that's already there? So we're taking a hard look at those sections of our zoning code and trying to come up with something that maybe makes more sense. And it's not, again, we don't want your 1-story house 5 feet away from a 3-story apartment. So that just doesn't make sense. Go ahead. Another big one that we're seeing is, especially in the North Valleys area, a lot of new industrial development is coming to town. And we have areas where we have these big industrial buildings next door to residential neighborhoods. And so here's a great example of just an image of what we're looking at, right? So we want to make sure that we protect those neighborhoods while allowing those industrial uses. So what we'd like to do is kind of take a bigger, broader look and say, what are the areas that we're trying to protect? So we know lighting is an issue. That those big dock doors, we have big semis coming is an issue, with the noise and the hours of operation. So we want to take a higher level look and say, how do we put some standards in our zoning code that everyone has to follow those standards rather than just kind of hit and miss. And then this was hard to see from where I'm looking at, but that table on the right, so every one of our different zoning categories has that table. Basically says if you're zone multi-family or single family or industrial, here's the maximum height the building can be, or here's the density the building can be. We have some fun ones. So maximum number of stories. A lot of our zoning categories say you can have 2.5-story buildings. What's a half story? I don't know why. It doesn't make sense, right? Again, it's not a hidden Easter egg, or do we do that on purpose? So we want to fix those kinds of things to say, is it 2 stories or 3 stories? We don't have a lot of buildings that are half stories. So let's fix that. So there's a lot of those types of things that we just need to go back and kind of reevaluate and say, let's find some best practices and really what makes sense for this community. Okay. And then so we have those 2 lists, right? We have the zoning code update, the 400 items, or the things that the staff's working on right now. Separate from that, we are also working with consultants. Here's a list of things that City Council has said, these are priorities, big picture stuff we want you to take a look at. So the ones in red are the ones we currently have a consultant working on. And so we hired a consultant, especially on signs appeals, that has an expertise both from a legal perspective and the land use perspective to help us say from a best practices perspective, what do other jurisdictions do to regulate these types of areas? And so the ones in red are the ones we're currently working on. Over the next 1 to 2 years, we're going to take each of these individually, these topics, and go through a more robust kind of outreach process. And we'll be back in front of you guys for each of these types of items, and then take them to our planning commissioners and council. So there's a lot happening over the next 1 to 3 years. So you'll be seeing a lot of us from cities outside. Okay, so outreach process, what we're working on right now, the zoning code update, hopefully all of you on the now received an email today. From the city of Reno, you guys have all been listed as a stakeholder in this process. And so we have set up kind of different processes, for the next July, well, for the month of June. We're reaching out to all the nows, and just giving you guys an update on what we're doing and why. And then in the months of July and August, we're gonna reach out to our technical advisory committee, and this is people that actually use the zoning code. So if you've never opened a zoning code, you're probably not a technical expert. You may have an opinion, which would put you in the stakeholder category, but if you've never opened their zoning code, you're not technical people. So we reached out to planners and engineers and landscape architects, and just regular architects, and we're putting together a task force to help us work through the zoning code. So they're gonna be working with us in the months of July and August. And then we're gonna go out to all the stakeholders, and again, you guys are considered a stakeholder as well, but we'll do that in the early fall months. And then we'll go to our planning commission for their review and approval, and then finally on to city council. So if you just kind of want to follow along, maybe don't have to attend any meetings, you're more than welcome to do that as well. We have set up a separate City of Reno webpage. If you want to see any documents, you just want to sign up, you receive emails, or if you just want to provide comments, you can do that at any time, again, over the next 6 to 9 months. Just to kind of stay in the loop and stay abreast of what's going on. And then big picture again, so over the next probably 6 months or so, that's when we're reaching out to all stakeholders and the technical advisory committee. And then finally, winter of 2024, which is really just around the corner. We'll be back for the planning commission, the city council, and hopefully a new zoning code that is better than what we.
So you have like one setback for certain kinds of properties and another setback for another kind of property or whatever.
It's all based on zoning, so we have probably 20 different zoning categories, and each zoning type has different setbacks.
And where do you get that? That's not that.
So we currently have everything, that's just the city standard, so that's in our zoning code now. We are gonna be looking at all of our setbacks and say, does this match with kind of what best practices are? And so we'll take a look at each one of those and say, is this typical, right? And again, some of the big things that we're hearing is for multifamily. So we have different levels of multifamily zoning. Some are super dense, 30 units to the acre. Some are less dense, more like 14 units to the acre. So we want to make sure that if you have a really dense development with 3 stories, we don't want you 5 feet from single family development, right? We want to create a bigger setback. So we're going to look at all those and say what makes sense.
Go to Carla next.
Yeah, so is it my understanding then that these setbacks and height restrictions and so forth, these aren't set in stone? You're in the process of looking at these and perhaps changing them?
So we're, again, it's in code now, right? Code is what it is today.
Okay.
So we're gonna look at those and say, where do we continue to run into the same problems? Especially in these infill areas, we continue to hear the same complaints over and over. So for those types of issues, we're saying, well, let's take another look at it. We're hearing so many complaints, should we change it?
Well, I can say that, you know, from my personal perspective, living in Midtown, plus attending many of these NAB meetings, there are a lot of issues with this, and we hear a lot of complaints about, you know, people living in these beautiful single-family home neighborhoods, and now you've got a 30-foot building next to them, it's creating shade, it's 5 feet from them. And I see that all around, and it's appalling, quite honestly. I mean, I know that we need to try to get, you know, more units in to accommodate people, but it's really creating a lot of problems in some of the older neighborhoods, the way this stuff is being thrown on top of people who, you know, lived there for 50 years, and now there's some hulking complex next to them.
Yeah.
It's really got to be looked at and planned better.
Yeah, no, great comment. You can go.
Are your setback requirements for natural and artificial drainage channels similar?
No, we have a different topic. We have major drainage ways and we have different, so if you have a major drainage way, like North Valley is typically where we see major drainage ways. Not so much in our downtown area, we don't really have a lot of those there. But we do have setbacks for what we call drainages, major drainages.
Are they similar for this different land uses or zoning classifications?
Just any development next to a major drainage way, regardless of what kind of development it is, we have setbacks.
Okay.
Yeah.
How is it determines that something was done on accident versus on purpose? I mean, both examples you gave, like, just off the top of my head, I can come up with real strong counterpoints to say, no, that was the purpose, but I can totally understand why. You're cruising through and it looks like, oh, this would make sense to pay, but. So how was that decision made? How was that vetted? How, like, if it's there, it's probably somebody thought it was a good idea.
Yeah, and so again, the staff for the last 2 years, right, we have a number of staff, we have planners. As we go through the code, as we're finding things, we're making a list. And saying, here's why that doesn't make sense, maybe we should move it to an area where it would make more sense. You know, if we have a fencing standard, there shouldn't be fencing standards in 10 different sections of the code. They should all be in one section, so that's just as simple as move them all in one section. Same with setbacks, right, I shouldn't have to go to 10 different sections of the code to figure out what setbacks are. There should be one place to determine what my setbacks are. So, as staff, again, and more the people that use the code every day, we're saying, does this make sense or not? So then we'll go out to that technical advisory committee.
So the redundancy piece, I totally understand.
Yeah.
But the specific example that she gave, like, lights that are 3 feet tall, yeah, okay, your guys' parking lot lights that are 3 feet tall, but I can also understand that if I'm the neighbor next to the lot, next to the park, I have 120 foot tall, I understand there.
Right.
So then I'm pulled out of the public process as a neighbor, now we move that from the public process, so. Maybe there's a reason that 3 foot thing, which seems silly, one hand, but on the other hand, it was next to it. There's a reason.
Yeah, and maybe that it shouldn't be 3 feet, maybe it should be anything over a normal. I mean, I literally have never seen a light in a parking lot that's 3 feet.
Yeah, and that's probably why it was written out. So that people have a reason to come, an opportunity to engage in public process. So that, and I know some regret, last meeting here, developers like, well, if I built this exact same thing as condos instead of townhomes, I wouldn't even have to engage with you guys, which is kind of frustrating, but. Grasp a whole lot of the density and some of the stuff that. other people use.
Yeah.
So. Back to my question, who and how determines, okay. The light restriction and redundant, so consolidated, put it in section versus notice changes. Quality character of a particular part of it.
Yeah, so we'll start with that technical advisory committee, folks that use the zoning code and say. That makes sense or doesn't, then we'll go out to the stakeholder outreach, so we'll have 6 months worth of public process where everybody can provide input and say. That makes sense or it doesn't, here's why it makes sense or it doesn't. And then take it to planning commission, do some workshops with them, get their input, take it to city council. There'll be lots of opportunity along the way. And then, big picture too, you know, if that is one sentence in 750 pages, nobody knows it's there. So from that perspective, why don't we put it in a place that makes sense, right? Maybe it should be in our lighting standard. If you have lights over 10 feet or 12 feet in a public parking lot, maybe all of them should trigger a public hearing, not just in parks, right? Like bigger picture,
Yeah.
what are we trying to solve? So how do we clean that up so that, again, nobody would know that that one line is in that section of code unless you randomly found it. Just doesn't fit there. Nobody's looking at it there. It gets, I have yet to see us, like, again, do a park project where you that was in the code, which is part of the knowledge.
Interest, yeah.
Yeah, let's put it in a place that makes more sense. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm just curious, because for example, the one we had with the last meeting, and I assume it passed. And I was very upset about it because there's too much density, there's not enough way for people to get in and out. I went and looked at it and watched it. The driveways are only 9 feet long, you can't even go visit a friend, park the car there, they don't even have. So my reaction to this whole thing is, what good are the codes if they're gonna be so ugly? And everybody needs a driveway, they don't have parking, so what are you gonna do with that? I mean, to me, that should never pass. And I don't know now if anybody in that neighborhood is going to appeal it to the council, but the dynamics are off. I mean, you have way too much, and if you can't build it successfully, then put some single family homes in, you can get a lot of money for those.
Yeah,
And so that's what I don't understand, why this is going on, when it doesn't even make common sense.
yeah, that was another project you're talking about.
It's right on, if you go down, go down.
Is it the Puma?
Yeah.
1960 something.
Puma,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, the one that just went to planning commission.
Yeah, this went through from it and,
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, if you look at that plan, it's horrible. So what do you do with that? I mean, how do you fix that? I mean.
Yeah.
I shouldn't happen to be real candid.
And then maybe that's one of the things with the zoning code, again, you know, if we find these repeat offenses of what's working and what's not, that's what we're looking for.
I know
It's just gotta be fixed.
I mean, this thing with the traffic speed, it's not that it was a bad project, it just needed to have maybe 10 homes in it, or 12, not 17. And have people have a driveway,
Yeah,
I mean, it didn't make sense at all.
yeah.
Sorry, Will, he called on me.
I thought you said, well, you're pointing at me.
Just to piggyback a little on what Margo said, over the last 4 years, one of the things that has frustrated me. I only have one more month as a stakeholder, so let me get my stakeholder in. But it seems like every project that comes through is requesting a variance or a zoning change. And they're granted instantly, and it makes me wonder, what good is the zoning code if you can just walk away from it at a moment's notice? The Councilman Rees made a comment at the last meeting I found disturbing, but it had to do with spot zoning, and he said, we do that all the time, we get to do that. Well, again, then, what good is the zoning code if it is that fickle? But.
Well, it makes you feel better. We tell people no all the time.
Well, but let me ask you this question that I'm more deeply interested in. How do the setbacks fit in with requirements for emergency vehicle access? Let me just tell you the reason for that question. I noticed you're talking about mid-rise or a high-rise next to the single family dwelling. But what if you have high rises and mid rises next to each other and the setback is still only 10 feet? How do you account for emergency vehicles being able to come in and take care of old fires, for instance?
Yep, so outside of just our zoning code, we have a fire code as well, international fire code, so every project that comes forward has to go through the fire code review. They look at height of the building, the width of the building, and how far their hose can reach around the building. So each one's looked at on a case by case basis, but all of that is, again, not necessarily zoning code, but fire and building code.
And when does that review take place in relationship with zoning review or planning commission review or?
So anytime somebody submits a project that comes before you guys, it's a conditional use permit or a tentative map. Our fire department looks at it. When we get to a building permit as well, they look at it. So it goes through a couple of reviews.
What if there's no conditional use permit required because the city is handling the whole thing itself?
Then we go through a building permit and the fire department reviews every building.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I learned for this project, came through, there's some density bonuses.
Yes.
Are we looking at those?
That has not come up as an issue. I mean, let's say our master plan encourages it, it encourages density, so that's one of the things that council put in our zoning code. At this point, we've not heard feedback to take that out or push that the other way.
Here's your feedback.
Density's bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, that density bonus thing, because I agree with a lot of folks. I
Yeah.
think that the specific project that we're familiar with,
Mhm.
at a dozen, maybe 14, it was fine, but the bonus, we took it up to 17, 18 units. So yes, how do you balance the need to do more density, but you know, maybe this bonus thing's overdoing it in some parts of town. Maybe it's appropriate in the North Valleys or other areas of town, but in down, maybe it's not appropriate.
Yeah.
And maybe that's something to
Yeah.
look at.
Maybe you should have tried to put them 123 units on a 1.3 unit parcel.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no good feedback.
I live in a neighborhood where the planning commission said one row of condominiums. And somehow the council said two, and you cannot get a fire truck between the two. And I don't even know how a fire truck would get in, it's really on Skyline and, Passion.
Mm.
And they're nice little condos, there's nothing wrong with them, but you cannot get a fire truck there. And hopefully nothing burns because there's, God help them, there's a restaurant next door. You have to go through the restaurant parking lot, you get into that parking lot. And a fire truck can't get in.
Mhm.
So I mean, why does that happen?
Again, I can't speak to each one, I don't know, I have to look at what the fire department approved, I don't know if they approved it sprinklers, or they approved it 20 feet distance between buildings.
They're not even something,
Yeah, so I don't know.
there's no place for it to turn around.
I couldn't tell you.
So I just wanted to, okay.
Go ahead. Okay. So, I had a question about the North Valleys. You mentioned that and the way the development is happening up there. I agree that there are issues with the industrial versus the residential, but it's all just like patchwork up there. And it doesn't really make sense. Are you looking at like maybe concentrating the industrial in certain areas and not? I mean, it's a mix now. So you're talking about, having controls over the trucks and stuff. Well, I mean, it's a done deal. If you have Amazon, if you have, whatever, Sherman-Williams, you got all these big companies up there, they're gonna be trucks. And now they're building all these houses right next to them. They look, and then there's the airport too, and that's, gonna be an issue as they build more and more close to there. Is that something that's on the table to look at, a better plan for handling the North Valley developments?
So at this point, we've not been instructed to look at changing anyone's zoning. This is just a cleanup of our existing zoning code,
Okay.
not to look at any zoning changes. In terms of the city and what uses are allowed.
Well, when are you gonna do that?
If the council directions to look at North Valley, then we will, but at this point. we've not been
Well,
directed.
so you said it's asked you to do that. I mean, no.
Council sets our program.
Well, my question is that, so this code is like your standard, right? Is this what all the other departments will comply with? Planning commission, building, or do they have their own code?
They all have their own. This is strictly zoning, so it's everything related to building setbacks and parking and landscape requirements, where uses are allowed. The building code has probably 5 other different books that they look at. And that again, we're not touching the building code, that's a national building code. The fire code also has national fire standards, we don't touch that, we just touch the zoning piece.
So they're all separate. I mean,
Yeah.
you could have this code here, but these guys have their own code.
Yep, so for instance, let's say you want to build Walgreens, right? So somebody Walgreens will come to us as the planning department and say, can I put a Walgreens on this site? We pull up the zoning code and say, here's zone commercial, we allow Walgreens in a commercial zoning district, so yep, you can do that. And then they say, okay, great, my architect wants to do this there. We say, here's your building setbacks, do you meet those requirements? And then we say, well, how many parking spaces do you fit? Right, here's how many parking spaces you have to be able to fit. Once we get through all of that piece, then it goes through all the other departments. So, for instance, engineering, they look at it, make sure it's graded correctly, and utilities all get there correctly, and the planners will look at that, the engineers look at that. The building folks look at the structure of it, are they designing it the way that meets all the building codes? Fire department looks at it and says, do you have sprinklers? Are you required to have sprinklers? Yeah, fire, truck turnaround, do you need fire truck turnaround? So everybody, there's a lot of people within development services, we have over 70 staff members. So everybody has a different piece of the pie, so to speak, that we all look at, we have different rules and regulations. So this is really just focusing on cleaning up the zoning code piece, not a major overhaul, not looking at rezoning anybody. Just again, for the last 2 years, what are the continual problems we continue to see over and over? Now's our chance to clean this up.
The reason I asked you, because it was kind of leading you into it, was that the place I work, somebody actually called me and asked me, do we have 3-foot high line? I said, no, our street lights are 30 feet. So, street lights are 30-foot street light, but the question you were asking could be asked by a bunch of different departments. And it's not you guys, it says where the street lights.
Right. Streetlights really matter. Yep. And that's the thing too. So we have different regulations for anything on a city street. Then we have regulations for on private property. So what we control from a zoning perspective is within private. But NV Energy controls, it's not the lights on the private property. Another jurisdiction.
It's lucky, yes.
And so, other places, Stonewall, for instance, right, they control water lines, so they have their own regulations, they have setbacks for how far buildings can be from water lines. How far trees have to be from water lines, so the developers are the ones that really have to understand all of the different rules and regulations. What we control in the city is one small piece.
When there, I believe there is 3 foot high lights, and those bollards that they use for decorative lighting.
See Montreal, a lot of-
Right, it's even the buildings.
Mhm.
So any other board questions?
No, I think we need to change the council if everyone's doing it.
You got a question back there, somebody back here have a question? Go ahead.
The zoning code, does it mention elevations at all?
Building elevations, like the look of the building.
Just elevation in general, 'cause in zoning code, is the elevation in relation to ocean level, like 0 feet period? Or are you like, is there import? So if you import something, like you borrow the product, or if you're on credit on the product, or on margin with the product from another state or wherever, and you build it this high, then they're gonna try and say, well, we own this elevation of this, at this specific elevation. And use 2, so you've got, an elevation of 2 stories or 2.5 stories, so you're saying, but then you're also at 4,735 feet. And so that's elevation we have control over, or things like that. Is that included in zoning code?
No,
Or just
no,
building?
not to the degree you're talking about. So anytime we look at a site, we look at how it's graded. So let's say that this is on my side right here, it's flat. This, whatever this elevation is where we start with 0, right? So 2 stories above that would be your 2 stories. Well, let's say you go 30 feet. So if here's the elevation, you go 30 feet above that based on your.
You can still make 2 stories in that 30 feet.
Yeah, if
So
your
you're-
limit is 30 feet, that's a
Right.
limit. Or if your limit's 2 stories, we have some buildings that have really tall ceilings. You've seen some, like for average single families, it's say 9 feet, some go up to like 10 feet. But then you have sites that are kind of not flat, right, there's some topography to them, so generally, say somebody will come in and grade it, so wherever they grade it is where we start.
That's 0.
Mhm.
So like up above skyline, the campus side, those ones that were built in 2016, 2017.
Okay,
Those ones, they had a grade like that, and then come down, they've got basements and like boiler rooms and all that stuff.
like the daylight basement style.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So that would be 0 is where the grade occurred.
correct, yep, wherever they graded it, so this is our starting point, that's what we call it.
0.
I mean, just for generic purposes, I call them 0, but yeah, that's where you would start with. How many, so again, from a zoning perspective, how tall can my building be? Our zoning board says, let's say it can be 15 feet or 30 feet. So we would say, you graded it, this is 0 feet, you can go your 15 feet or your 30 feet.
So in that regard, let's say if I've got a site with a 30% slope and I'm building at the base of that slope. And my slope is 65 feet, let's say between, could I get a variance to go 65 feet tall?
For height,
Yeah,
so you can't get a variance for height unless so we look at what is the maximum height for your zoning code. If you're saying. I would
in other
30
words,
feet.
because I'm building against the side of the hill and I'm not obstructing viewpoints or anything.
You could apply, but staff would recommend no. Variance, so a variance is also very tough to get, so a variance you have to show there's a hardship. We don't get very many variances, planning commission just denied a variance last week. Related to a variance for time, so we don't see them very often, because typically they're denied, and so a really unique situation. But again, just because I want it to be colored, it's not a unique situation.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you guys.
Mr. Chair, we actually have a public comment on the Zoom. Donna Keats has her hand raised. We're gonna allow her to talk. Probably a presentation. Donna, can you hear us okay?
I can. Can you hear me? Okay. Are you there?
Can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Donna. You're gonna have 3 minutes, okay?
Okay, thank you. My name's Donna Keats. I live in Ward 1. It was a good presentation, Angela. I have some questions or comments. The setback thing, is a real problem. If you make it uniform, single-family housing in all different parts of the city should not all be treated the same in terms of building height, and I suspect you'll just go to 3 stories allowed in single family. But I think it's important that there be some flexibility for discretionary local changes. So I would say you should go to the smaller end of things and continue putting the burden on getting it being larger, like getting a smaller setback, which gets approved almost all the time anyway. But more to the point, I participated in, I think, all but one of every public meeting during the Title 18, during the whole master plan process. And I have a tremendous amount of comments that I've submitted, spoken to council, PC, the whole thing. And I do recall that there was a lot of input given to council about the lack of residents being involved in the process of these changes. And I kind of think that that was an exclusionary process. Your technical working group allowed normal people to show up, but they kind of blew them off and were rude to them during that Title 18 process. And I think this would be an excellent opportunity to allow members of the public who are not designers, engineers, architects, and any of the other things, but to allow other people, people like me who are super familiar with this code and the process, and to participate, to be able to be in the discussion about what you're doing, about you make uniform set. But there was a reason that 2.5 stories was chosen. And so if you're going to change that, you know, why, where, and how, what was the history on that? There are things like that that I think need to be discussed. And I think somebody like me should be allowed to participate in your technical group on how to uniform the code. I would not put my foot into places that I don't understand. But there are a lot of areas of things that happen in Title 18 that I'm very interested in, and I do know a lot about. And I just wanted to put that out there, that I would very much appreciate an opportunity for this version of the technical group to not be so exclusionary as it was when Title 18 was passed. Because everybody has different motivations. And based on everything that's happened, all the things that have gotten permitted, I haven't seen a lot of action that supports the residents of this city, but I have seen a lot of action that supports the developers and development. And as you're aware, we're now going to have a 3-story creation right on the corner of Virginia Lake, right or across the street from Children's Playground, with 400 and some odd extra daily trips on a terrible access route, with a setback next to a single family house that if you took a look at that, you'd have to.
Donna, you're at your
Okay.
3 minutes.
Well, please consider it and engage other people as well.
Thank
Thank
you for
you.
your comments.
Thank you. Any other?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have Reagan Miller. You should be able to unmute. Reagan, you're going to have 3 minutes. Can you hear us? Reagan? We're not getting any input from your microphone, but it looks like you're unmuted.
Hello?
Hi, we can hear you.
Oh,
We haven't
perfect.
started your time yet. Just start with your
Yes,
name.
Reagan Miller.
Okay, go ahead. You'll have 3 minutes.
Yes, again, thank you, Angela. And I thought Donna Keats's comments were very on point. One thing that hasn't been brought up with regard to the setbacks is that there is no requirement for the city for anybody who wants to go outside of the building permit to provide a survey. So a setback, how do you know where the boundary is if you're not requiring surveys? And that's been a bone of contention for a lot of people. So anybody can it's the Wild West out there. And so I would like Angela, if she could address the reason why the city, when they want to densify this area, has not required people that want to go outside the building footprint to provide a survey. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
There's a question here.
You want me to answer?
Who'd like?
So when you submit a building permit, you do have to submit a site plan that shows where your property line is. I think she's saying that sometimes people don't. We do require people to submit a site plan, which means where your property line is. So I don't know if anyone wants to go through that. Go beyond that.
And then
Required to use anything beyond like what's available on the GIS, or they have to go get a surveyor?
If you're doing, let's say like a new development, you have to have your plans have to be stamped by a surveyor and an engineer and a landscape architect and an architect. So that's all required as part of the building permit process. We have people that oftentimes submit like a fence permit that don't have their site surveyed, and we don't require a site to be surveyed for a fence permit. Something where, again, if you want to, can go out and figure out where your fence, your property line is. But then we leave that up to kind of the property owners to work through that dispute themselves.
Is there anyone else who'd like to give public comment? Either virtually or in the room?
thank you. We're gonna move on to item B2, presentation and discussion regarding the 2023 redistricting process to create 6 wards in the city of Reno, including how to provide input. Discussion only. Go ahead.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me. Do you mind if I'm up here with the screen? Does that work for everybody? Well, thank you. I'm, for the record, Callie Wilsey. I'm the city's director of policy and strategy, and I'm honored to be here tonight to talk to you about the 2023 redistricting process. So here's what I'm hoping to present to you today and what you can expect out of the presentation. First, just an overview of the process and why we're redistricting again this year. Some rules for how we're going to draw the maps and the rules that go along with this process. An understanding of the timeline and the various ways that you can get involved in the process. And then at the end, I would love, hopefully there's a discussion. I'll have to answer questions, but discussion about communities of interest in Ward 1. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. So what you're seeing up on your screen, we also handed out, I think there's additional copies at the front if you weren't here when I was walking around the room, but these are in your packet. This is a flyer with a bunch of dates that are going to make a lot more sense as we get going through the presentation. So Tyler, will you hit the next one? Tells in Spanish. All right, so the next, hold on. Thank you. So this month, we are kicking off a process to redraw our ward boundaries. And this is really the process of, so right now the city's made up of 5 different wards, and we are moving to 6 wards. The city charter, which is our essentially constitution that creates us as a city and says what authority we have, requires that the city will transition from 5 wards to 6 wards in 2024. So we're really taking the existing city limits. This is not about expanding or annexing more land. It's what is currently the city and breaking it up into 6 rather than 5 different chunks. And the process really is about determining which neighborhoods and communities are grouped together for the purposes of electing a council member to the ward. Next slide. So why are we here again? Why are we redistricting in 2023? You probably heard about 2 years ago, this word redistricting a whole bunch of times, and a bunch of jurisdictions were going through this. Very normal procedure for jurisdictions following a census to go through the redistricting process to make sure wards or districts are balanced in population. And we did that in 2021. But we also know that we needed to switch to go to the 6 wards for 2024, and that's the purpose of this project that we're talking about tonight. So back in 2016, charter committee, similar to this, it's a citizen committee that makes recommendations to the council and the legislature, made this recommendation to move from 5 to 6 wards. The rationale behind the recommendation was by reducing the number of people that each council member represents, it would have the goal of being more responsive to its residents. So that's kind of the rationale for why we're doing this. This recommendation was supported by the legislator in 2017, and that bill, when it was adopted, stated that the change would occur in 2024, and that's why we're here today. So what does this change in addition to more wards mean? It does change the composition of your city council. So right now, your current council is made up of 7 members. You have a mayor and you have an at-large council member, who both of those positions they must live in somewhere in Reno, and they're elected by the registered voters throughout the entire city. And then you have 5 ward council members. And those council members must live in the ward in which they represent and are elected by the registered voters of that ward only. When this change is complete, the composition will look a little bit different. There will still be 7 members, but there will be a mayor who again that won't change. Citywide, must live somewhere in the city, but you'll have 6 ward council members. They must live in that ward, and they'll be elected by the registered voters of that ward. Next slide, please. So this transition will take a little bit of time. It'll from now really fully be complete in about 1.5 years. So this is what this is going to look like. So we're starting with the redistricting process. Council adopted some principles in May and June. We're kicking this off with the community, and we'll talk more about that. But we'll finish the redistricting process in August. The deadline, we have to get the new ward maps, new ward boundaries to Washoe County, the registrar of voters, by September 1st. This deadline is necessary for the registrar to prepare for the general election. Then for all purposes necessary to carry out that election, that could be candidate filing. So individuals know what ward they live in, so they can file for office, where you would like to see them campaigning. Voters will know what ward they're in. The maps will be in effect by January 2024, but the transition will fully be complete when that 6 ward council member is sworn into office in the 2024 general election.
Do you foresee any, preponderance of gerrymandering for the fact that it's going to be after the general election?
So the maps will be done before the election.
But the actual Ward 6 council member appointment
The council member will be elected after the maps are done.
was said after general election 24 right there.
So the maps will be done. We will know what the
Council, because you can still gerrymander with people. It's not just districting, it's not just drawing a line.
Well, let's walk through the process and maybe we can answer your question a little bit more.
So let's let her finish the presentation and we'll do questions. Sorry. No problem.
Next slide, please. So what is our approach to redistricting? So the city has made a commitment for this process to be transparent, to be community informed, and to be data driven. And we used kind of 3 fundamental approaches to this. So we're going to be driven by a set of redistricting principles. We're going to talk about those more in depth. We're going to use data and analytics to support the recommendation, and it's going to be informed by you, our community. As with the redistricting process we did 2 years ago, we're partnering with a data analytics firm called Flow Analytics. They're an independent GIS firm who does this type of work throughout the country. And were very valuable last year in helping prepare the maps and kind of condensing all of the feedback we got and making it so everybody can understand what that information looks like. So I'll be taking your feedback and helping create those draft maps, which will be iterative and opportunities for feedback from you all and the rest of the community. Next process. Or slide to there. So this process is designed so that everyone's voice can be heard and the deadline for the new maps can be met. So what Flow goes through is they go through data collection and community council input phase. Then they're going to draft some maps based on what we gather in that. Then we're going to put those out and say, what do you think? And then it kind of goes through that way. We're going to revise it and then we're going to come back and we're going to present a revised set of maps. And then it goes to council following that. We'll talk a little bit more about that. I think a couple of the steps in here, we know that the final plan with any sort of redistricting process, you're kind of balancing a lot of competing interests. And our goal here will be to be very transparent in the process that we're going through. So the community can see the different versions and variations and why the recommendations are coming forward in the way that they are. So the redistricting process is governed by laws at multiple levels: federal level, state level, local level. Earlier this year, the city adopted its own set of redistricting principles, and they really align with those laws. But I wanted to walk through those a little bit. So we must be in compliance with all state or all local, state, and federal laws, including the Voting Rights Act. They must be nearly equal in population. We know we're never gonna get like perfectly equal in all 6 wards. It would never be kind of feasible. And our charter gives us a 5% deviation or variance in which to play with. The wards must be geographically contiguous. We must retain the current council members with existing terms that extend beyond the 2024 general election. And that's wards 2 and 4. So what that means, let's walk through that a little bit. So the council members who have currently been, or who are currently in the seats for 2 and 4, they were elected in 2022 for 4-year terms. Meaning the voters said, we put you in office until 2026. So we need to make sure that those council members continue to represent 2 and 4. The seats that are up for election in 2024 are Ward 1, Ward 3, Ward 5, and Ward 6. So that is what we're looking at in terms of the locations of current council members. We must solicit community input, which is our first step here tonight. And the 2020 census must be used as our data source. There's also a set of shoulds. So we should preserve neighborhood integrity. We're going to talk about that more in detail. We should also preserve the use of existing natural boundaries, and we should be as compact as possible. So you can see there's a lot of criteria, and we're going to be balancing that criteria. There's some that are musts, like can't break the law. And there are some that we're going to do our very best to do, such as existing natural boundaries and neighborhood integrity. Redistricting really involves compromise, but we're going to be guided by these 4 requirements and the best practices that we see. So next step, or next slide. So when we talk about the analysis, our one of the primary principles is equal in population. So right now, the total city population based on the census is 264,165 people. So if we break that up equally into 6 wards, it's about 44,000 people per ward. We will refer to that as the ideal or target population for each ward. Again, we won't be perfectly equal at the end of this, but just to give an idea, our ideal ward population right now with 5 wards is 53,800 people. So we're talking about each ward is going to have to get about 8,900 people smaller to kind of balance that out. Next slide, please. Again, here's more information on the balancing of the population. So we talk a little bit about there is a, so when we talk about population, it's total population in the ward, not voting age population, not another statistic. We might look at those for equity reasons through the process, but the final numbers are based on total population. And the city's charter requires a deviation of 5% or less. When in talking with our consultants, it's a pretty strict requirement around the country. They tend to see more around the 10% deviation mark. So we have a pretty small window comparatively across the country, what we're looking at. Next slide, please. So again, a few more of these. Contiguity is going to be important in terms of how we're looking at these, making sure that there are no islands. We like to say except for real islands, but in a desert, doesn't play too much of a role here. There is some language in our charter that says if there is a portion of land that is essentially not touching any other portion of land in the city, it can go to any ward, but you have to kind of balance that with other jurisdictions, and if that exists, it's a very small percentage, and we haven't really had run into that issue. Compactness. So wards should not be like unnecessarily thin or serpentine or to try to make some weird shapes. There are actual data analytic measures that we can look at to measure compactness, but at the end of the day, it's really a visual test. When we talk with our consultants, they talk about a lot of the court cases is really kind of, can you look at it and does it look visually compact? And again, we'll use existing or natural boundaries. That could be major streets. It could be the Truckee River. It could be a stream or a drainage way. Lines that are already used for different boundaries, a drainage way district potentially. So there are different ways to do that, but we try to utilize boundaries that exist already to kind of help keep communities together. Next slide. And then when we talk about the Voting Rights Act and demographics, there are legal requirements that can sometimes be at odds. So the 14th Amendment prohibits the use of race and ethnicity data to draw ward boundaries. In the meantime, the Voting Rights Act requires consideration of race and ethnicity data to avoid vote dilution. And so our consultants really look at this seriously. When they start a redistricting process, they review the breakdown of the total population, what each ward is now, and look for potential districts that could represent 50% citizen voting age to create a minority majority district or voting block. If it exists, they do further analysis, and there's a process that they go through to understand the feasibility of that in relation to all the other laws that exist out there. All right, so the next piece is community of interest, and I said we're going to spend some time on it. So, because this is where our first piece of outreach that we are asking for people to get engaged on. So, community of interest is really a population that shares a common social or economic interests that can really be defined on a map. There's no set definition or requirement. It's how you respond to your community and your neighborhood. It could be a historic district. It could be something cultural. It could be something that unifies people in a specific area, such as language could be one. It could be an HOA, shared cultural heritage, different special districts. So there's a lot of different ways to view a community of interest. And we try not to define those up front because we want to hear from you guys about what those are in your wards. And this is really where we start to kind of get into that neighborhood integrity issue. So let's talk about what this outreach process looks like. So we are currently in phase 1, which is this first part of June. And it's all about communities of interest. So we kicked off in early June with a community meeting. We are also hosting a Spanish meeting, in Spanish this week on Wednesday, and we're going to all the NABs. There is also a survey online, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that, as well as a mapping tool. And you can also email and call us. So there's multiple ways to provide input on this first process where we're saying, we want to hear about your neighborhood and your community of interest. We're asking for the first round of feedback to be due by June 22nd. So then what we're going to do is we're going to take all that feedback, and our consultants look at it, and then they draft preliminary maps. And there'll be some options, 3, maybe 4, kind of depending on how much feedback we get. And we are going to release those to the community on a second community meeting on June 27th. Then there's going to be different ways to provide some feedback on those maps. How'd we do? Did we miss the mark? What do we like about the maps? What do we not like about the maps? We're going to collect all that feedback, and then we're going to revise them and release another map, the final map options, in a community meeting number 3 near the end of July. And those maps will then go to the city council in August. Next slide, please. So how can you get input? So right now, there are multiple ways to do this. We've got the community of interest survey. We have a new tool called Districtor, which actually lets you draw your own map boundaries. Excuse me. You can attend a redistricting meeting. You're at one tonight. You can also send comments to redistricting@reno.gov. And so this first phase, again, we really want to hear from you about community of interest. Next slide, please. So we created this community of interest survey because we heard some feedback from the community that maybe the mapping tool wasn't exactly the easiest for everyone to use. Some people really want to dive into the details and draw their own map and kind of get to that, but other people were looking for a simpler way to get involved. So we launched this survey, and it allows you to kind of tell us about your neighborhood, describe it, provide some boundaries. There is a slight mapping tool if you want to use it, but it's not required. So that survey is up, and it's really simple to use to answer a few of those questions. Next slide, please. We also have Districtor, and this is a new tool where you can actually prepare your own ward boundary map. It's more free-form and there's more detailed mapping. There's no questions that walks you through it. So there are some instructions that we put on our website. And we encourage everybody before you start that to read the redistricting rules and the requirements a little bit more thoroughly to help you. But some folks really wanted to dive into that. So we wanted to make that available depending on how much people wanted to be involved. One of the interesting things, if you log on, you can also view maps for any of the maps that other residents have submitted. You can see their proposals. So anytime somebody submits one of these maps, it becomes a part of our public record for other people to see and to actually build on. Next slide. So just as a quick mock-up, this is something I mocked up very slowly, but essentially, if I was kind of playing out how this works, it didn't get us there, but we drew this boundary for one of the wards. You can see I got us to that 46,000, which is slightly higher than the ideal. You have the yellow boundary that I drew. All I did was click on the yellow and then start to outline it on the map. And with that area, it's 32,000 people. Again, I'm below that, but it kind of helps you kind of see where you're at in that ideal population if you want to play around with that. Again, before you kind of draw and go to do this, we do have a how-to guide that we encourage folks to get to and read those redistricting requirements to help. And that's all available on reno.gov/redistricting. Next slide. We also have a series of meetings. So we are at the Ward 1 NAB tonight. We have the rest of the NABs for the months of June and the Spanish meeting. The next community meeting will be June 27th. And all of that information, including how they're hybrid meetings, so you can attend in person or virtually via Zoom, and those links are available on the website to sign up. Whew. That was a lot. So thank you guys. I hope it helped answer. I'm here to answer questions, but would love to hear from you as well. So I will turn it back to you guys for however you want to run it, and here to answer questions.
It's hard for me to gauge how important a priority is having similar looking districts. The only thing you really talk about is a number, or how much diversity should play in it, might play in it. And it seems to me like if you're going to play with boundaries, obviously the number is important because that's what you're shooting at. It seemed to me though, what would be important would be to, if I adjust a boundary, it would automatically tell me then, it would break down the number of people by age group, by gender, by race, and by income.
So we go back. So I know you can't see it because it's a static slide. This data layer slide, if you like, there's a tab in there. And there's different layers that you can turn on and see, for lack of a better way to see it. But like you could click, there's like a box for race and ethnicity that you can turn on, and it'll show you that based on what you're drawing.
Okay.
So that is available in that data layer tab.
So, well, that's good to know. It would be nice to have a table with you suggest that there will be 3 or 4 options to look at if there was a table, and then those categories right there, so you could compare them all in one table.
Oh, I think that's great feedback. Do we have that 1-sheeter after this again? Or the 2-sheeter, the NAP?
I'll write it down. The summary?
Yeah, is that in the packet?
I don't think so.
Okay, I know it came in really late. Yes, you were correct. What we did last time, and we will plan to do that, when we have the map options, like the preliminary map options, it came with a data set as well that went with it. So you could see, okay, this is what the breakdown was of population. This is what the race ethnicity, this was actually compactness scores for each one. The consultants gave a set of data that went with that map option as well for a way to review it and provide feedback. So thank you for that. We'll make sure to continue that forward.
Yes, I have a question. It's my understanding, and I'm not a city planner by any stretch of the imagination, but in the old days in Reno, you made sure that I've lived here my entire life, I'm old. The center of Reno was considered to be the main hub of the community. And in those days, every ward had part of the city of Reno. Is that going to be the goal here?
So it's not a part, so we don't have any requirement or direction to make that happen.
I know, but is that going to be considered?
Yeah, so I think if we, if that is something that the community values by everyone having a piece of it, then like put that in your notes to say this is important so we can provide some options that would look like that. Because that it's not off the table. It's not a yes, it's not, I don't know.
I mean, I think the philosophy is that then every council person has some interest, and that's really the hub of your city.
Yeah, no, I definitely understand. I've heard the comments, so I don't think it's completely off. Not my first time I've heard that. I do think it's getting more challenging with, I call it the three arms of Reno. You got one up in the northwest, one in kind of going into the west, and one south, and those populations are becoming larger. It's becoming harder to have those. But I do appreciate that feedback.
So real, thanks for coming out, appreciate it. I think you guys, the work that you did in 2021 is a heck of a lot of work, so here you go again, good job. In the June 1 meeting, there was community input about using redistrictor, talking about the two council folks, where do they live?
Yeah.
So if I'm gonna go spend time messing around with districtor, which is a learning curve.
Yes.
How do I know that my map's not gonna be automatically rejected because I drew a member out of their district or out of the board?
Perfect. No, I'm, thank you for bringing it up. I had that in my notes and I forgot to say it tonight. Wait a few days before you go to districtor, because in that data layers tab, there's going to be a current council members box that you can check to see the census block in which current council members live. We're just working on building that layer and getting it in the system. It's just taking a little bit of time.
Kind of on his question is, so, for example, 2 and 4
Mhm.
remain the same. Devin Reese is the at-large. If his house comes within 2 or 4, then he will be out of a job, correct? Because he cannot run, he's not in 6, he's not in any of the open positions.
He is in 5 right now.
Well, I'm just saying, for example.
Yes, yes, that would be correct. So if any existing council member, just like any other member
All within 2 or
public
4.
fall within the revised boundaries of 2 or 4, that seat would not be eligible to be ran for until 2026.
So they would be out of the job. Correct. So any other board?
Just to go back to the demographic descriptions of each of the proposed scenarios. I would hope you would avoid using averages and use medians.
I'm thinking through it to make sure I'm responding in
For
the
like
like,
ages and income, you're saying?
because we just go percentage of total is how we. So based on the census data, let's say there's 100 people in this ward, because my math is terrible. And we say,
You're saying that race and ethnicity and income are broken down more
Percentage.
fully than just a single number.
correct,
Okay.
yeah,
Any other board?
Do we have any majority minority boards right now?
we do not.
Are we even close?
It is. I would say no, and based on the cursory look, the consultants are still looking at it. Our Hispanic population is growing, and we've reached 25% of our population is now Hispanic. But the Hispanic population is pretty spread out throughout our community, and throughout the community. So they're looking to see if it's feasible, but right now we don't have one with 5.
For the NAB members, there is some additional information that I did not include in the packet that Callie sent over for me, so I'll make sure to include it in the packet after the meeting, and of course, it'll be available to the public as well.
And we'll go. You want a question?
Yeah.
All right, public, come on up, we'll have 3 minutes.
All right, here we go. There we go, so question for you, so the Jenny, so since you up for Jenny posted the Ward 1 is up for re-elected, or is she not eligible for re-election? Does she count? Does she have to live on new Ward 1 or does she not have to live?
So according to the principles, that's what we were talking about. The answer is no. It's only wards 2 and 4 that would have to be retained.
Okay. Yeah, if you guys, thank you for Ward 1, so if you guys, if I give you a 6 option provide, if you don't like my map, please let me know, because I live in Ward 3, so please let me know if you want me to change your neighborhoods, so we can help with our community with that for democracy, so thank you.
Any other questions?
Seeing none in the room, we do have one on Zoom, Mr. Chair, Donna Keats. Donna, you should be able to unmute. You'll have 3 minutes, same as last time. Can you hear us?
I can.
Okay. Go ahead whenever you're ready.
Okay. Callie, I saw you grin.
Hi, Donna.
Hi, you did a great job. I appreciate the updates that you've done to your presentation. It was very well done. I have just one outstanding question, which is, I know that you're mandated to use the 2020 census, but the Census Bureau has an estimated update from July 2022 that shows another 10,000 people. And we know there's even more than that. And as I recall from the council meeting adopting these principles, there was a second data source that could be used, which I don't know what it was. But I'm just wondering, if we say we have 15,000 more people, just based on driving around Reno, I think a heck of a lot of them are at the south end of Ward 2, and others are around in Northwest and North Valleys. But I wondered if there is any way to accommodate the additional population in this so that they're adequately represented as well. And so that when the ward boundaries are all redrawn, and we think we're doing it, but we're leaving out well over 10,000 people, if there's any way to account for that in the alternate database that you were talking about as another source.
No, thank you for the question. I will certainly ask our consultants. My understanding of, so the census does their big census update at 2020, we got it in 2021, and that's the data set that our principals refer to. Donna, what you're referring to is the Census Bureau does do an American Community Survey kind of annually that provides us some estimated changes, but it doesn't go to the level of the census data that at the census block level to be adequate to compare the two. So we might look at American Community Survey data for some demographic information for context to the process. But in terms of kind of we have not found a data source that we could stand like legal ground on for a redistricting process to say, by merging these two, it would be a good data set. And because normally redistricting happens every 10 years, that is the data set that we would have used in 2020. That's where the principles stand.
Could you possibly use building permits and see where is the bulk of the new building going on, or the new housing units?
Yeah, so one of the challenges with it, right, is so development sometimes occurs and sometimes doesn't occur. So you're using projection data in alignment with a true data set of the community source. Now, one way that you could look at it from a feedback standpoint is to say, I feel like, let's say, South Reno in the current Ward 2 is growing more. And I think that they're gonna grow more in the next 8 years, 7 years. That's why I have a consultant. And so maybe when we adopt the map and there's that 5% variant, we want Ward 2 to maybe be slightly on the lower side to accommodate for that growth over time. The challenge will be to really find a data set, and like from a building permits perspective, let's say, okay, we got a couple of houses built here, but did those people, right, because we're not talking units, move from Ward 1 into those houses in Ward 2? And there's no way for us to know that. And so it's really about the population from the census. I will bring up the question to our consultants, but my understanding is that's the challenge with trying to merge multiple data sets.
So you're talking about the data integrity, I assume.
Yes, yeah,
Thank
Really,
you.
it's a snapshot, not a movie. Right?
Correct.
It's not-
Yeah.
Be 2030.
yeah, the next one will be 2030.
Thank you. for
Maybe
your
I'll get to do it
comments.
again.
You're really good at it.
Maybe we should expand to 9 seat, no, 8 seats, so in 2030, so.
About to see how the city grows, right?
No,
All right, any other?
It'd be the same 6, really.
Would anyone else like to give public comment on this item, either virtually or in the room?
All right, thank you for your time.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
All right, we're gonna move on to the 3 development projects, so the 3-1. LD's 323-00059 Rob Drive extension.
Thank you. My name is Eric Casey. I'm with Wood Rogers and I'm representing the applicant tonight and I'm here tonight to talk to you about the Rob Drive extension. Yeah. So this is located just directly south of Rob Drive, the terminus of Rob Drive, so south of Interstate 80. This property has had some recent projects approved. This project is the one that's directly south of the intersection. And tonight we're looking for a major site plan review for hillside development. So no development associated with this. It's just creating permit. Go ahead. Go ahead to the next one. So this is the specific property. This is about 50 acres in size, and you can see that there has been grading activity before. This is a quarry that has kind of been used for various infill projects or for fill for various projects around the area. Some of it is disturbed and some of it's still in its natural form. We go on to the next one, please. The master plan is suburban mixed use, so this is looking for commercial development. You go on to the next one, the zoning. General commercial is the zoning, so any development that does go in here would have to conform with the general commercial zoning standards. Go ahead and go to the next one, please. And then so for the hillside development in Crescent Hills, when you're looking at hillside development, it's all about the slopes, and so there's certain triggers that trigger this major site plan review, and because this is over 10 acres in size and it does trigger the it has natural slopes on it, which you can see there in red that are pretty steep. We have to do extra steps in order to show that we are observing those natural slopes. I do want to point out though that on this slope map, the area where you can see a little bit of disturbance on that area picture before, you still see some of those steeper slopes in here. So those are not the natural slopes that we're trying to protect. The natural slopes we're trying to protect are on the south end. And you can see that if we go on to the next one, you can see that these 2 pads that we are going to be proposing are avoiding those areas. So part of this grading permit has going into extending Rob Drive. So that's the right of way that we are extending down in the gray. It's going out to the west, to the properties to the west, and then as well to the east. The two pads that we are creating are just going to be for, just purely grading, bringing utilities into there. And then future projects will come in. Again, these will have to, be developed to the general commercial zoning standards. And so for this traffic impact report that we did do for this whole area, they did put a number of uses in there where they're assuming they have a shopping center, a hotel, gas station, and multifamily. It doesn't necessarily mean that's what we're proposing or what's gonna go in there. But that was a good, good anticipation for that. And so any other future entitlements, especially like multifamily or something like that, will be required for this area. Yeah, you go on to the next one. So looking at the cuts and fill portion, for cuts greater than 20 feet and for fills greater than 10 feet. This is where those are occurring on site. So the red is the cut and the blue are fills. And so you can see that we're asking to we are triggering that for what we're proposing. So that is just the presentation. You can go on the next slide. I'm Eric Casey. This is Andy Durling, though he is working on the project. So this is the contact information. I'm happy to answer any questions tonight, but if you want to reach out to him directly, feel free.
So we saw within the 6 months that we're talking about stormwater to the west of this property. And I think your entrance was through, they have to get through your entrance before they get through there. Yeah, I think we're all, on the same- we're on, I just want to make sure we're on the same page that this would be the entrance into that one we saw only 6 months. So
Could you briefly describe, what level of erosion control plan you have to have for this work and your stormwater, controls?
Yeah, so we will have to design for stormwater, we will have to design retention basins to handle any of the additional flows that are going to be created through the grading. For the as far as slope stabilization and everything like that, there are standards during construction that you have to follow. I'm not an engineer, so I don't know the details specifically of those, but you do have to follow those. For the grading itself, on the really steep slopes, I believe there will be tiered walls and then landscaping put in there. A lot of this stuff for the hillside development standards, we're not allowed to, we have to either not disturb about 16 acres at a minimum for this whole site or like enhance it with additional landscaping afterwards. So everything that is disturbed is either going to be revegetated in its natural state and then it's along the roadway or within one of these pads, then a certain percentage of that has to be landscaped. And so you're gonna have street trees and landscaping and formal landscaping and everything along with the development.
There's nothing being built here, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So are you putting streets in or are people gonna have to develop that later?
No, so the infrastructure will be going in. So this is to put in so once what this gets approved, what will come in next will have to be final plans for the actual street. And then that will most likely include landscaping. And then you have to follow all the air quality and water quality regulations. So if you have a pad and if it's been graded, if you're not going to vegetate it with something that's like, if you're not going to develop it, you'll revegetate it with something either natural or not. If not, if it's going to be developed later on, you have to make sure that it's secured with you like tackifier or some treatment until it's developed. And you'll either have to have water trucks out there or something like that. You can get fined for.
Well, they're creating now, it's streets and the super pads are basically the pads for future sale, for future building. Okay.
I want to make sure I understood the order of operations, I guess. Okay. The retention ponds. That's better. During the construction process, this grading process, which is a large area, it's gonna take a year or two. Some significant amount of time. During the construction process, with these retention ponds and things like that, be available at that time, or is it all just temporary runoff types of controls, during the construction phase?
I honestly cannot answer that. This is probably what you need it to be. Because I'm not familiar with the construction process, right? So I know they do have to put up like silt fences and everything like that, but typically, when you're moving dirt,
Yeah, the reason I ask is because there's a lot of people who live below that, and if it rains like it did, I don't know, yesterday.
yeah,
They might be a little concerned about runoff.
We're in Carson City, right at Van Dang, and all that.
That's Carson.
Any other board question? The audience question?
Would anyone on Zoom like to give public comment? If you'd like to give public comment, please use the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom window. We have no commenters, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. We're gonna move on to items B.3.2, LDC 23-0062, Viewpoint Apartments, Access Road.
Keep changing directions, I'll move down here, it seems to be jumping back and forth. For the record, my name is Dave Snellgrove, I'm planning manager at CFA. Working on the project, and actually, got to changes, I looked at the agenda item. A conditional use permit and a major site plan review are virtually the same, they go through about the same process. We are actually what's called a major site plan review. That's what the end SPR is on your agenda item. If you go to the next slide, please. Those property location, the Montebello Apartments, I came over here because I'm on the point of the map. The Montebello Apartments sit here by the Home Depot. They've been there for a number of years, a little over 20 years, those have been in existence. There's 3 parcels in association with our applications. One undeveloped, it got graded quite a while ago. I was here before this board probably last in August, probably July or June of last year, with the Viewpoint apartment site is what we came through. And I've got a picture of it and may ring a bell, those of you that were on the board at the time. And then we've got the Montebello property here. So Viewpoint is this one, Montebello's here, and then they also own the circle inside Sierra Highlands Drive, the loop that goes down to McCarran. But what we're requesting, similar to the last one, is a cuts and fills special use permit association with an access road. This was gonna be initially targeted to be a secondary access road. And if I could have you go down through my presentation, I probably should have moved, keep going, and you'll get to questions, and there'll be a blank page, and it'll be the one after that. Then I'll jump back up. Give you a little bit going one way. Okay, so this looks at the Montebello site here, the Viewpoint apartment site. You can see the grading that was done on it years ago, but that was never completed. All that was approved as one overall project with over 850 units in it. This dashed blue line was the one that we were looking at to go with this emergency access or secondary access, and we were working along that. There's Harris property here, and then you get on the Home Depot property. Had some really good conversations with Harris. That seemed like that was going to be pretty straightforward. And initial conversations with Home Depot seemed like that was going to be doable as well. And then they went on radio silence on us. So we thought, okay, we've got some variables here. We've got to try and figure out how do we accommodate for our secondary access. This would be the emergency access. Primarily, we were going to go through the existing apartment to get out to Sierra Highlands Drive as was originally designed. So we looked at this route here. There is an existing pedestrian path that follows along behind the apartments that they're primarily for the apartment folks, and that was part of the amenities that were put in. But okay, if we go a little bit down the hill from that and extend the grading off of what was done there and come out, there's a current connection point out here onto the loop road of Sierra Highlands Drive. When we realized, if we're gonna put a emergency access of 20 feet wide, a little bit more width on that, we can do primary access where we don't have to send all of the Viewpoint apartment traffic through the middle of Montebello. So we went through and said, okay, that'll become primary access, and I'll get more into the detail of the connection that we're making. in one of the slides, I'll go back up, but I want to give you a little history of kind of where we've been. Go back up to, it's probably about the third slide. Oh, go down. Let's see, okay, so this highlights the properties that I just showed you, so this is where the viewpoint apartments were approved. This is the existing Montebello, and they also own the circle here. Next slide, please. Down below us to the south is Chalk Bluff Water Treatment Plant on the bottom of the slope. So this was the original plan from back, this was from 1995. This was originally done. We didn't have one that had the whole picture to it, but the access point that comes out, and this connects in with Sierra Highlands Drive. It was what's called a dual median separated access. And at the time, back in the 90s and into the early 2000s, that was allowed as primary and secondary access. Fire codes have changed, city codes have changed. So that's no longer allowed to service as primary and secondary access, which is why we need to look for another way. Go to the next slide, please. This was the plan that was approved back in August of last year for the viewpoint apartments. And one of the conditions was we have to provide a secondary access suitable to the fire department. So that was what we're trying to work on. And then we realized, hey, it may make some sense to make this the primary access out. So looking at this plan, we look at this area here, the trail is this dash line. We would continue it on and reform it from what it is right now. There's currently a path that continues out and goes to a sewer line access road. It cuts more at a straight line across through here. And there's a sewer line that comes up from Northwest Reno and runs downhill. Go to the next slide, please. Okay, so what this shows is, and it's really hard to see, I probably should back up, that the trail system that is on here, and it comes all the way out to this point. We're gonna leave that in place. That's an 8-foot wide trail. That's been graded out. If you look, when you're driving along McCarran Boulevard, if you look up, there's groupings of evergreen trees along the backside of the apartment. So that actually follows along with the trails. And they're situated in kind of a more naturalistic pattern. So we're proposing this just slightly downhill from where that trail is. So we may join it relatively close at one or two points, but for the most part, it's going to be a separated pedestrian access that runs along this road all the way up to this point. This new road will come out and connect in with the main access into the Montebello apartments, be reconfigured a little bit to give people appropriate direction without just making a left-hand turn where people stop and things stack up. It allows for good movement around. So doing a turning circle there, people that are coming to Viewpoint will come in on the way home. They come around, make a 3/4 turn, and then come out to the Viewpoint apartments. People that are going to Montebello come out here. As mentioned before, everything in original design, the way that we had it in August of last year, when we went to Planning Commission, everything was going to go out and feed through this point here on the day-to-day traffic. Fire department wanted us to get a secondary access. Next slide, please. So this is the landscape plan. This section here, that's on an ads here, kind of ran out of room on the page. But that shows the connection up. Here's where the gated secondary access would be that's not connecting in with the main primary access point. The fire department had a concern that if something happened right at the intersection, that may become a choke point. So we're trying to find a different location where fire apparatus could go in or out, or emergency vehicles. I have had conversations with staff, and I was a little concerned when I got this from the landscape architect that was a little regimented. Have had conversations with staff about grouping the trees, and they're going to put a condition in that requires that the trees be a little bit more grouped and more natural appearing. I have some photo images, and I'll point that out later in the presentation. Go to the next slide, please. So this is what the site looks like right now. So you've got some groupings of trees. It's not real regular and regimented. There are groupings that look a little bit more naturalistic. These are images at the bottom of the trail and then slope down. So the road would be down below where the trail is, but you can see that the slopes in some areas a little steeper, but in most areas are not too bad. Next slide, please. So this is a before and after, this is a photo enhancement, and again. Staff is going to require that we do tree groupings rather than regimenting 1 foot, one tree every 30 feet, which is what the standard code says. And the landscape architect followed that to a T. And I'm a little concerned when we turned it in, I thought, I'm probably gonna want to group. You can see what the appearance is of the group trees as opposed to the very linear trees, so that'll be something that we'll be required to do in final. Next slide, please. This is just a couple photo perspectives and views from above, so you can kind of see. You can see the trail a little better on some of these images. And we have a separated road, so it should be a very nice pedestrian environment and create a good access way for the vehicles. And then again, that's the photo enhancement or photo simulation that we had on the previous slide. Next slide, please. So this is the area where this is the emergency access point, and then this area we added on from just being an emergency access to bring it out. One of the challenges that we faced in here is there's an existing detention pond right here that serves the Montebello property. We initially looked at trying to bridge that, and talking to some of the structural engineers, is going to be quite a large bridge structure to get across that and maintain the water volumes below. So looking at this as an alternative, we went, so, okay, if we go ahead and we fill this in, we were trying to stay under the thresholds that the city requires any type of an additional review for grading, and we do stay under it for the most part. We have about 5,000 square feet that actually exceeds the city's thresholds. And my next slide will highlight that. But we do have some displacement of water from this detention basin. There's already a pipe that runs across as an outflow onto this circle property in the middle of Sierra Highlands Drive is owned by the same group that owns Montebello. And they actually are the same ownership group that owns Viewpoint as well, just so you know. That's in private holding over there. So we're gonna enlarge the detention area there to take care of the displacement of water in the grading that we'll do here. Next slide, please. This helps to highlight the areas that we actually exceed the city's thresholds. The pink areas are fill areas that exceed, spills in excess of 10 feet, and a blue area, and there's a tiny blue area right there, actually exceeds 20 feet. So the total is about 4,600 square feet. We're under 5,000 square feet of area that actually breaks those thresholds across the whole development acreage, and we're disturbing just under 4 acres in total. So it ends up being about 3% of the overall disturbance area actually has one piece here, one piece there, one little piece there. Those are the parts that actually exceed the thresholds for city review, which go and bring us to this major site plan review application. Next slide, please. So this goes through some of the stats. The overall site, all three of the parcels, is just a little bit under 100 acres. We have a disturbance and development area of only 3.46 acres, so it's actually less than 4. And our total area that exceeds 20 feet of cut or 10 feet of fill is actually 4,800 square feet. So it's 0.11 acres, which equates to 3.2% of the overall development area. Next question, please, or next slide, please. And that closes my presentation. I'm available for any questions you may have.
Questions? Timing, so you're filling in a portion of an existing detention basin.
Yes.
But you said that there's another basin downslope from it that you're enlarging.
Yeah, actually, this one probably shows it the best. You can see the grade lines here. This center area here already collects runoff from the roadways, and it also has an outflow pipe from this detention basin that comes over to this. This is privately held property owned by the same people that own this property that Montebello is on. So we'd end up having more of the water going over here into the center where the
And that
Sierra Highlands
lower basin would need to be enlarged.
Yeah, it's not a lot of enlargement, but we do need to get some more volume in.
Other questions?
No. There's The secondary tire access, is that still a requirement?
Yeah, that still is, and that's on the approval that we got for the Viewpoint Apartments. We did meet with Trey Palmer at a staff applicant meeting earlier this week. And he had some concern just in this location alone being something that, because it's a one-way road there heading south and then going out onto Buchanan Boulevard, he was concerned about overall, being able to get in with a left or right turn. So go back to the slide that I had to go down to this after my question slide. One more, there we go. So this location here, he said, I'm fine with it, but I want to have it supplemented. Hindsight being 2020 on this side, I really wish that they had built this part first rather than that part. But this is out on the end of a peninsula. And there's development that you saw the previous project that was over here, the Flying J property. We'd love to be able to make this purple connection. I've talked to NDOT about that. I mean, FHWA is very hard to get a hold of, and you don't know what you're going to get out of FHWA because that actually goes into the freeway. I was cautioned by NDOT. They said, yeah, it's probably a year and a half process just through our process. And then we could all be happy with it. We could send it on to FHWA and they could say no. So we would love that. I've worked on this property on the other side, the old Heiser property over here. I think that would make a lot of sense. However, that one's a little more pie in the sky. I've heard that the developer that's working on the Heiser property right now may be approaching it. And I was told by Trey Palmer with the fire department that he's had some discussions that they may try and do something there. If they go that way, that would be great. But it's something that we're gonna probably start moving on this within the year plus or minus. We gotta get a building permit application in. We're about halfway through our approval timeframe right now. You get 18 months when you get a conditional use permit approved. So we're about halfway through that right now. So we've got another 9 months before we've got to submit a building permit or ask for an extension. And I hope this we can get the building permit in that time. And then this road here, another little caveat to this is we were hoping to be able to bring construction traffic through. I mean, you got the Home Depot, they deal with the construction. We thought that wouldn't be a problem. Now, they didn't want any construction traffic. It was only going to be emergency access. So this would function as our construction access road too. So we don't have to go through the middle of the Montebello apartments, which present doable, yet some tighter turns. So this would become the construction route primarily. And then when these get built, they would become day-to-day traffic. With emergency access here, and I believe Trey is gonna try and see if he can help us in getting another emergency access point going through the Home Depot property. This weird shaped property, you can see the billboards. This is the 5 or 6 billboards heading into Reno site that Harris has their signs up on. And then you go on to the Home Depot property here before it actually turns to asphalt, you get onto their property. And then you come down on the other side of 7-1. There's already emergency accesses across that point. We didn't think it should be much of a problem, but again, we're not in control of Home Depot and they went on radio silence on us, which was a little disturbing. So we're trying to find a way, some ways that we're a little bit more in control of our own destiny relative to some of this. So we're coming forward with this. Trey's going to push us along to still try and get the other route too, to make it an even safer option. We technically then have 3 points of access, which is okay. And we're just going to have to reapproach Home Depot. And we did ask Trey if he might be able to help us if we were having some problems being a fire official for the city, if he might be able to help problem that along.
Thank you. Some questions?
Would anyone in the public like to make comment? Would anyone on Zoom like to give comments? If you'd like
I do have Bob Skip on there. He's with the applicant's team if he has anything. Bob, if you don't raise your hand on there, we'll assume that you're good, or you can text me real quick and say, yeah, you'd like to chime in, or
It looks like he does want to talk, so. Bob, you should be able to unmute.
I did. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. No, I think that pretty much states it. I think The biggest thing is the road that we're putting in. That is going to be the construction access road first and then the formal entrance to Viewpoint. Is really a great asset to this particular project. Rather than originally it was approved going through Montebello. Which that was before me. I thought that was going to be a much more difficult thing to have happen. When you have close to 900 units using one entrance. So this is a positive sign. As far as the stuff with Trey and getting the thing from Harrah's and Home Depot, I don't think that's going to be a problem for emergency and fire access.
We're hopeful that we don't get the cold shoulder again on where the last conversations were.
Well, I'm going to be handling this one, so hopefully I'm better than that. You never know.
I'll owe you a golf round, Bob.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Would anyone else on Zoom like to give public comment? If you'd like to give public comment, please raise your hand using the Zoom feature at the bottom of your window. Mr. Chair, we have no comments.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for this. Pleasure being back before you. It's probably been, 8 or 9 months. Appreciate coming to your course. Always very well run. Enjoyable board to come present before.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Move on to item C4, Commission Committee Member Reports and Announcements.
Does anyone have any announcements to make?
That makes me want to do even more. I'm actually having a conversation with our team tomorrow about the bridges. A specific question has to do with the new park and the park over there for the construction. So it's close to a year or two. So if anybody would like to join that call with me, report back to whatever happens.
As long as there's less than 5 of you on the meeting, it'll be okay.
Well, that shouldn't be a problem.
I'm gonna make it over here and more design. I mean, if you look at some of the bridges in some of these cities, they're on that state. This one is just flat out like.
Pretty boring.
Yeah, it is.
Any other announcements? Seeing none, we're gonna move on to item D, which is future agenda items.
We have a question. Is there any reason why the NAVs can't have input into something and say, hey, we didn't care for this and this particular, like the one that we're talking about, which just got passed? Is there any way we can have our input put in? I mean, I know that we're not elected officials nor are we appointed employees, but we live in the damn neighborhoods.
And we're basically a homeowners association, so the only way we do it is through the public comment forums and or online, that's really.
Yeah, I know, but what I'm saying, as a group of people, we should be able to have some input. They don't have to follow it, but we should be able to say, hey, we as a committee think that this should be at A, B, C, and D. I mean, they obviously aren't gonna listen to us, but at least we have some formal input that would be part of the record.
So part of the record, I actually tried it. And holy smokes, it works. At least it got in the record.
Well, yeah, it gets in the record, but I think it should be, there's, I don't know.
The board is,
Yeah.
Yeah.
we don't have much teeth.
Well, that's the problem, and I think we should have some teeth. I mean, what are we doing? Wasting our time?
Is there any mechanism for someone making a motion? And if we adopted it as a commission, that it be forwarded to city council through our Ward 1 council member?
We have to have it on the agenda.
We can add an item to the agenda, but it wouldn't be for action because the board is not allowed to take action. But I know that the staff does look at comments from the NABs, and they do look at them separately from comments from the general public when they're looking at any development that comes before the NAB. So what we're actually, we're kind of limited by the ordinances that, and the resolution that establishes the NABs. So the only people who can change that would be council. And I know Councilmember Beck is very,
We'd like to do that.
Maybe in your follow-up on this, what would be helpful for me is the ordinance that define what a NAB is. and
Yes.
what its job is. Could you forward those on? Because maybe that's a jumping on point
Yeah, 'cause
for fixing this.
Seems like for me, we don't, we're kind of like, okay, you sit here, we listen, we go, well, I don't like that, and well, so what?
That's it.
There's no
I mean,
vehicle whatsoever now giving a resolution or intent or anything like that.
no, the NABs cannot take any action on any development project. And I can send you the resolution that the council adopted reestablishing the NABs in 2017.
Yeah.
I think it's just good information for all of you to have. But the only people who can change that would be council, and it would have to be a majority of the council, not just one.
Yeah,
Well, so
that's
maybe
a resolution.
Ward 1 started, Ward 2 might pick it up, and Ward 3 might pick it up. I mean, what I'm saying is there's got to be, and what do we really do here?
We brought
Yeah, I'll make sure to update Councilmember Breckus, and she knows that the NABs don't have any way to. Force compliance or any sort of.
Is there any precedent for having a joint meeting of all of the NABs and allowing members to raise an issue like this to see if there's consensus across various NABs?
There's no precedent for that I'm aware of. There is a precedent for meetings between, like a joint meeting between the NAB and the CAB, the County Advisory Board. But I would have to check with the attorneys to see if it's even allowed for multiple NABs to have a joint meeting. But as it stands, the NABs cannot take any action on any developments.
That, but why can't we say, hey, we just made a decision that we think this is bad?
To your point, so maybe something that we could do is during public comment and other NABs, jump in on the Zoom and say, hey, we're from Ward 1, we have this concern. Maybe you guys in Ward 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 potentially have this concern. If you do, well, let's put a bug in our councilperson's ear. I mean, maybe that would be, because to Tyler's point,
Well, we want to make sure we don't do anything. And I think we're here to say, we don't like this in our ward.
We get to vote on the agenda, the minutes, and.
I know.
And concluding the meeting, right?
I know, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a waste of time. I mean, why do they even have this?
Yeah, that's a good.
I mean, I sound like a.
We brought it up, we talked about it, Jenny even asked us, yeah, why do we, she's right. Do we need it?
Well, right now we don't.
We haven't. And in the olden days, the NABs had money that they could, people would come to them and ask for money. They could like donate money towards, they had a certain amount of like $20,000 is what they had a year, and they could give it out to nonprofits, and people would come in and give presentations, and everybody did something you could vote on.
But I think it's important because like, when I know you live in a different part of Ward 1 than I do. When I went down and looked at that lot and thought that, I thought, this is really bad. I mean, not only for parking and getting in and out and access, but just who the hell want to live there? I mean, seriously, you don't even have a damn driveway. You have a garage.
So one thing that we're done for sure, we're recorded, right?
Yes,
Minutes are taken.
yes, meetings.
Minutes are taken and they're passed out to planning commission and so what he's saying is our voice is heard, but not as a vote, like we said, unanimously we hated it. Or unanimously loved it, right? So we're not.
So if members from the various NABs decided to hold a joint meeting, it would have to follow public meeting rules, correct?
Yes, any public meeting, regardless of which NAB it is, has to follow.
But in theory, they could do it.
I would have to check with the city attorneys to see if they're allowed to meet concurrently. Historically, they meet separately in their various wards or locations. But if that's something you would like to add to the agenda for discussion in the future, I can take that note and take it to Councilmember Breckus.
Well, I don't care about the others right now. I just.
Well,
like to see it happen.
I know, but if you don't, if you've got a line of the people up, if you want to refer.
You know, I think every now group should, for whatever's going on in that neighborhood. And that whatever the situation is, should have some input to say, hey, we live here and we don't want this. We'd like it to be X.
Right.
And that they don't have to do anything with it, but we should have the.
Well,
ability-
I have to feel that there must be other numbers on other NABs that feel some sense of frustration as well. And, you know, you need to have a more collective action, I think, to have an impact.
Well, you would have to, but you gotta start with somewhere.
Any other future agenda items?
Alan, whatever you wanna call it.
So the other one that we have to do for next month is the election of the chair and vice chair. So my question will be is, let's do it for either, we say it that term will start in August. Because what will happen is if we do it early, then I start the meeting and somebody else would have to take it over because.
You can also put it at the end of the meeting if you'd like.
I would say either, you figure out where the best place is.
Yeah.
Either at the end or we say that this will, that the term will start in August.
There's also options, we can have the election for the chair in the August meeting after you're off the NAB. You don't have to be present. For the
Yeah, but you're not
election
gonna
chair.
have like 4 people.
Yeah,
You have 3
Yeah.
openings.
Yeah.
Is it 3 openings and then 2 more? that's
We have
fine.
3, yeah, we currently have 3 vacancies, so
We're
we
gonna
still
do
have
5.
5, yes.
So you might as well do it next month when you have at least 2 people here to vote on these, so it's not 2 to 2 or 2 to 3.
Are you gonna run into quorum problems?
It's, a quorum is a majority of appointed positions, not total positions, so we could have as small as 2 people, and as long as both of them show up, you would have a meeting that complies with
So
open
once
meeting law.
my guy are gone, you guys can.
Do whatever.
change all the rules. Because
We have a cooling off period.
Yeah.
1 year.
I still think you guys are.
Going off period, yeah.
I cooled off for a whole year during COVID, but I guess you're cooling off.
Are there any other future agenda items we'd like to discuss?
Okay. Public comment is next.
Okay, Pablo, go ahead, you'll have 3 minutes.
All right, here we go. 3 minutes. So I did a Ward 3 meeting, which is Councilman Martinez. So he live in Don Street area, that Ward 3 need to be protected area, Don Street area could be protected by Ward 3s. And then not to be worried about, so for Ward 1, since she not wanting for re-election, we have a new board member. We could try whatever there wants, then for Ward 1, have 6 options. But if you don't like any option, please let me know which ward
I
you
want
want.
to say my Ward 1, please.
Okay, I will not talk about the meeting, so. There we go.
Your maps in redistricted,
Yeah,
they're in there.
yeah, in there, so.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Thank you, Pablo. Would anyone on Zoom like to give public comment today? If you'd like to give public comment, please indicate by using the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Mr. Chair, we do have one public commenter, Donna Keats. Give me 1 second. Donna, you should be able to unmute. Can you hear us? Okay, you'll have 3 minutes.
Okay, hello, everybody. This will be my 3rd comment for the evening. I will just comment on your discussion about you must have some way to make your voices heard. I am a resident of Ward 1, formerly of Ward 2. Is that the way it goes? Yeah, but I'm a board member on the Ward 2 NAB. And similar things have come up in Ward 2. I think you guys make an excellent point. I listened to the NAB meeting that you had when you all brought this up about what's the point, are we wasting our time? So I just want to let you know there are other people who have similar concerns who are on these boards. And I think that you have some great ideas. And I don't know what the lawyers will say, but most certainly it occurs to me that you yourselves could just choose to write a letter and however many of you wanted to sign it, expressing your opinion as Ward 1 NAB members, possibly not representing your entire community because the entire community didn't lob in an opinion, but I think that does carry some weight. And as the one person commented, in the old days, the NABs were different and people did pay attention. Council currently doesn't pay much attention to residents anyway, so it's kind of hard to know. But I think that being a board member carries more weight, and I don't see any reason why you couldn't just independently have 3 of you sign a letter with, as board members, we think this or whatever. I mean, I'm sure there's ways to do it. I, for one, would be happy to talk to any of you about how to make these NAB meetings more effective in terms of catching somebody's attention when things go forward and the political climates change. Right now, it's not in favor of the residents, but it used to be in favor of residents and they used to be heard. So, I mean, that's just my opinion. Anyway, I think there's things that could be done, and I would be happy to play ball with you as somebody from another ward who's now in your ward. And I think you have some good ideas, and I'm certain that there are ways that it could be legally done. And kudos for bringing it forward, because nobody wants to sit around and waste their time. I'm sure you don't, but you guys talk about some very interesting things and you make very good comments. And you know, my life is affected by the things that you do also. So I support you in that. And that's all I wanted to say. Thanks a lot. Feel free to contact me if you're interested in hauling in a Ward 2 board member for any conversation. Okay.
Thank you for your comments, Donna.
Sure, you have public comment? I guess, I want to talk to what she just said. If perhaps you or someone else were to draft a letter or a resolution or whatever you want to call it, as to making the NABs more effective and putting it on the agenda of the various NABs as to whether or not they agree or disagree with it, would sign on to it. It seems to me that would be allowable under the rules.
I can't comment, but I will talk to our city attorney and find out. I don't want to give you bad legal advice. So I'll check with them and see what they say as far as open meeting law. It gets a little dicey with serial communications, like if all of you were to send a joint email saying we declare as an NAB, we hate this or whatever it ends up
We
being.
just want a recommendation. We want to make a recommendation. We're not asking to change the rules.
But whatever if you have a serial communication together, it can be a walking
But
forum, which is a violation of open meeting law.
But if it is placed on a public agenda and discussed publicly, the public comment, then it's no longer a secret thing.
Yes.
Communication.
Meeting without being here together.
Yes, if it's on an agenda, and I'd have to check with the attorneys to see if it's allowed to be agendized, and if the NAB could take action on something like this.
Just make a recommendation. We don't need action. We just need recommendations. To say,
A
but
recommendation is an action. You can discuss, which is what you do now, where you say together, like, oh my gosh, we hate this project, or we love it, or whatever. But making an actual recommendation is in action, which would take a majority of the members in a vote, which is only allowed under certain circumstances. But I will connect with the attorneys because it's getting a little above my head, unfortunately. But I'll connect with them and I will send all of you the resolution that establishes the neighborhood advisory board so you can take a read through it and see what you think, okay?
what do we do? Nothing.
All right, but we are gonna get to do something.
Yeah.
We get it. We make a vote on all those in favor, say aye. Anyone opposed? Nay.